The most sought-after wrestling book imaginable would have to be Vince McMahon's memoirs. If the theoretical book were 100% true and factual, it would be the most entertaining read on the planet. If the contents of said book were completely and wildly absurd and silly, it would still be the most entertaining read on the planet. Point being, any anecdote involving Vinnie Mac has our attention. McMahon is the real-life physical embodiment of the most interesting man in the world. The little tidbits about Vince that have been revealed in wrestler testimonials have been oddly fascinating, whether it's his hatred of sneezing, or the fact that he's never heard of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, or that he didn't know what a burrito was, despite eating one every day. Life inside the McBubble is strange living indeed. The forthcoming list will look at some of the lesser-known McMahon factoids, some of which help fill in the blank gaps of the overall McMahon portrait. Others shed a little more light on his fascinating past. While nothing within may be as positively bonkers as the script for Pandemonium, the reported biopic about Vince's life, these facts still crack a window into the delightfully insane wrestling mogul that we all secretly hold dear. I'm Sam from Cultaholic.com, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Vince McMahon. Join us! Number 10. He wasn't always called McMahon. The name McMahon is so synonymous with professional wrestling, just as Disney is to mental famous cartoons and an overrated theme park. Come at me, Euro Disney. It's hard to believe that for a period of time in Vince's life, he didn't go by McMahon, even though he is the biological son of Vincent J. McMahon. Instead, he was raised as Vinnie Lupton. Yes, Lupton. Steve Austin would have had to fight the nefarious Mr. Lupton. Vince would have created Luptonism in order to mess with Shawn Michaels and job God out. That crazy individual leaping off the Titantron would have been a young Shane Lupton, and so on and so forth. So why did Vince use that last name? Well, his parents split when he was a baby, and he was raised by his mother Victoria, along with a rash of stepfathers. One of those men married Vince's mother, an electrician named Leo Lupton, whose surname Vince adopted until he was about 12 years old. By Vince's recollection, though, his stepfather was a horrid man who routinely beat his mother, and even him when he tried to intervene. Vince finally met his real father, the New York-based promoter, when he was 12, and the rest is history. Number 9. He has an older brother. The ill-fated limousine explosion storyline of 2007 was to have led to an elaborate episode of Raw based around a Mr. McMahon memorial service, which would never take place due to the real-life tragic deaths of the Benoit family. Plans for the episode were ambitious and would have involved many cameos from people who'd crossed paths with the evil boss, including some suspects in the whodunit portion of the story. According to former WWE writer Court Bauer, among those attending the faux funeral would have been an individual known as Roderick J. McMahon III, the never-before-seen older brother of Vinnie Mac himself. When Vince's parents split shortly after his birth, Roderick went with his father, while the younger Vince, as mentioned, was raised by his mother. In later life, Roderick became a successful businessman in the Texas area and is president of North American Metals. He has absolutely no connection to the wrestling business outside of his blood brother's success in it and his father before him. According to Bauer, they wanted to show a happier side of the McMahon clan by including Roderick and his own family as part of the services, contrasting them to the perpetual craziness of Vince's side. Number 8. He was once sent to military school. Vince McMahon, a troublemaker? Well, surely you jest. McMahon's fragmented childhood led him to misbehaving in a number of ways, with his misdeed of choice being the act of stealing cars. As a young man, McMahon was given the choice to either attend reform school or go to military school. McMahon went with the second option and was enrolled at Fishburne Military School in Waynesboro, Virginia. Even as a cadet, McMahon's wild side only continued. Not only did he apparently continue his infatuation with Repo Man-esque car theft, he claims to have stolen the Commandant's car on one occasion, but he also says he fed laxatives to the Commandant's dog, after which the pooch defecated all over the Superior's apartment. McMahon is reportedly the first cadet in Fishburne's then 85-year history to have been court-martialed, though the charges would later be dropped. McMahon graduated from Fishburne in 1964, just 1 year into Bruno Sammartino's first WWF Championship reign, and about 7 years before it finally ended. Number 7. He met his future wife in a divine place. Vince and Linda McMahon feel like a bit of an odd couple in some respects, with Linda's humble sense of dutifulness and responsibility contrasting against her husband's manic madness and latent cartoonish supervillainy. Yet the pair came together more than 50 years ago, and they've stuck together since. According to Linda, in a 2016 interview, her and Vince met as teenagers in the same church, which was obviously some years prior to Vinnie Mac challenging God to a tag team match. Vince's mother apparently sang in the church's choir and introduced the two to each other. Linda was 13 and Vince was 16, and within 5 years, in 1966, the two were married. Linda adds that her parents worked at a military base, which is where Vince's mother also worked, though it wasn't until that one day at church that they finally made each other's acquaintance. Little did Linda realize that one day she would help oversee the largest professional wrestling promotion in the world, and that Vince would leave her doped up in a catatonic state while he made out with a Canadian woman that hadn't even been born yet. I really wonder which distinction Linda takes more pride in. Number 6, he became an announcer at the last minute. Those who remember Vince as a broadcaster recall the phlegmy growls, the wide-eyed enthusiasm, the imitable laugh, and the premature enumeration in which he'd declare 3 counts even when the wrestler was up on 2. Today's drier-than-lint wrestling announcers, Mauro Ranallo, the clear exception, hi dad, makes one miss the urgent barks of Vince McMahon on Saturday afternoons and Monday nights. It turns out, though, that McMahon, despite being frequently around his father's product, wasn't exactly being groomed for the headset life. Though he had worked as a ring announcer on all-star wrestling broadcasts, his debut as a commentator in 1971 was a hasty move, the one that worked out for the better. It turns out that the presiding announcer, Ray Morgan, had quit the company just prior to a TV taping over a pay dispute with Vince Sr. Needing someone to take over in the 11th hour, Sr. turned to his bright-eyed kid. It was a good move. For the next 26 years, McMahon was a fixture as TV broadcaster, his "what a maneuver" cliches as much a part of the product as Hulkamania and Macho Madness were. Number 5, his start as a promoter came in a somewhat random place. McMahon has long been a persistent fellow, a quality that a promoter of any sorts needs in abundance. Much of his early persistence was directed towards his own father, since Junior wanted to promote the wrestling business just like his old man. There was some apprehension on Vince Sr.'s part, but ultimately, a chance for young Vinny opened up. According to Vince, there was a man under his father that promoted a small territory in the northeastern state of Maine that had been skimming money. Senior gave Vince an opportunity to fulfill his promoter dream by taking over that group, giving Vince 6 months to prove his worth. Vince claims his father told him, "If you don't make it, don't ever ask me again." Vince must have done pretty well for himself because he would soon assume much more responsibility, helping his father expand TV syndication throughout the 1970s. By the early 80s, Vince had taken control of the company from his ill father, and the national expansion wasn't very far off. Number 4, he once owned a hockey team. Stop us if you've heard this one before. Vince McMahon gets involved in the sports world, and it's a bit of a disaster. Years before black and red footballs, and even before his questionable decision to get into promoting bodybuilding, McMahon was part of the fast-paced world of skates, pucks, and body checks. Surely the movie Slapshot would be based on a McMahon-centric vision for hockey. But McMahon's foray into the blood on ice was short-lived. In the early 80s, McMahon owned the Cape Cod Arena in Massachusetts and wanted to have an American Hockey League franchise play in the venue. That fell through, but he would soon be offered an opportunity to own a team in the startup Atlantic Coast Hockey League. Thus, in 1981, the Cape Cod Buccaneers were born. However, the league was riddled with financial hardships and several teams had to fold. McMahon disagreed with a February 1982 decision to hold the postseason early due to these issues and chose to fold the Buccaneers, ending their existence after just 39 games. Curious note, the Buccaneers coach was a former hockey player named Jim Troy, who would later become an integral part of the McMahon's Titan Sports as a senior vice president. Troy would lose his job at the end of the decade after a heated backstage physical encounter with Koko Beware. Number 3, he achieved Hollywood recognition before any of his wrestlers did. How many wrestlers throughout history can you really say were bigger than the industry? Certainly names like The Rock, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, and John Cena come to mind, as do wrestlers that excelled in another medium like Jesse Ventura or Brock Lesnar. While all of those stars are household names to the extent that your mother would know who they are, it turns out that Vinnie Max got them all topped. In 2008, McMahon became the first individual primarily from the world of wrestling to earn a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. For his contributions to television as a producer of wrestling content for more than 3 decades, McMahon was bestowed the honor, earning it before any of his subordinates ever would. In fact, the only true wrestle-centric personality to earn residence on the walk is Dwayne Johnson, who was only added last year. One would think that the likes of Hogan, Austin, and Cena would stake their space in the coming years, but the boss was the one that did it first. Number 2, he actually owns less than half of WWE. At times, Vince has been referred to on camera as the principal owner of WWE, which is true in the sense that he owns the largest piece of the spandex pie. But exactly how much of the company is really Vince's? Turns out not even 50% belongs to the chairman. As of May 2016, it was revealed that McMahon owns little more than 46% of the entire company. His wife and 2 children own a combined 5% of WWE, with Stephanie herself having the largest share of that trio at 2.74%. Other ownership shares go to different individuals like Triple H and Kevin Dunn, who each own considerably less than 1% of WWE each. Larger shares belong to different investing partners, like a company called Lindsell Train Limited, who owns 7.4% of the empire. There's enough numbers therein to boggle the minds of everyone save for Scott Steiner, so let's just put it this way. While Vince doesn't own even half of WWE, he still owns a ton more than any other individual. And number 1, his father forbade him from wrestling. You may remember that earlier on it was noted that Vince Sr. was hesitant about involving his younger son in the wrestling business at all, that Vinnie Mac had to plead his way into even getting a less desirable promoter's gig. The younger Vince had high ambitions for himself in the world of wrestling, including stepping into the ring one day. His father, however, was vehemently against the idea. His belief was that the promoters should not be intermingled with the wrestlers and that promoters in general were never meant to be seen in front of camera. While the Austin McMahon grudge is a firm middle finger in the face of that notion, every other evil boss storyline otherwise is pretty much just a firm, yeah, good point. Good point. McMahon had yearned to play an evil millionaire wrestler and even created Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Man gimmick as a way to live vicariously through the idea. A decade later, McMahon granted himself his fond wish, stepping into the ring and becoming arguably the most entertaining heel in wrestling history. And that's what happens when you follow your dreams. So that's our list. I've been Sam from Cultaholic.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LessDefined. If you like what we do here at Cultaholic, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic. Anything you can donate will be greatly appreciated and will be recycled back into the business to create more high quality content. And most importantly of all, don't ever forget to join us.